Welcome back. The Center for Public Integrity gave South Dakota an F and ranked it 47th in the country for integrity in a 2015 report. Viewer Leslie believes part of that is a lack of checks and balances in state government. She wants to know what you plan to do so South Dakota is not on the top of the list for corruption.
Let's drill into this topic a little bit more. So go ahead and respond. We'll begin with Ms. Noem.
Sure. So I was the first candidate in this race to put forward a transparency agenda. No matter where I went across the state, people are concerned that they can trust their state government anymore. And we need to have more openness. And so I've talked about putting agendas, meetings, minutes all online and viewable by people, limiting executive session so that we know what kind of discussions are happening behind closed doors, not having confidential settlement agreements anymore unless there's a reason to protect a victim. But if the taxpayers are picking up the bill for a settlement agreement, they should know what they bought and get a receipt for that. And then having a reporter shield law is incredibly important. So reporters have the ability to do their investigative work without fear of retaliation, knowing that they don't have to reveal their sources or they won't get called before a court to do that. All of that will show the taxpayers in this state that they can trust the state government going forward as well. The problem with the scandals that we've had in South Dakota is that they've been dollars that have been administered by the state where something has gone wrong and there wasn't correct oversight. And Billy has sat on the oversight committee that is charged with making sure that those investigations are thorough. And while those investigations were going on, he was taking money into his campaign from people involved in that investigation. I just think that's wrong, and it speaks to his inability to be able to have integrity on this issue when it comes to him being the one who can clean up the corruption.
Okay, Mr. Sutton.
Yeah, I've led the charge on this issue to clean up state government, and I have sat on the GOAC committee and made sure that we were fighting for openness and transparency. In fact, some of the things that were uncovered in the Gear Up scandal were because I was fighting for open emails, and we found out that there were problems that go way back for Gear Up that we couldn't even audit because state government was only keeping records for 5 years. So I brought legislation to address that, to make sure we kept it for a longer period of time. It's the establishment that has been fighting me on this, and Congresswoman Noem is part of the status quo and part of the establishment. And the EB-5 scandal is a perfect example of that. She had the opportunity several times to address this issue at the federal level, where she said she would not support EB-5 without any changes, and multiple times she voted for that program without supporting changes.
How do we deal with the lack of oversight when it comes to these government programs, Mr. Sutton?
Yeah, I think we have to drill into a lot of the problems we've had been with federal dollars. And so we need to drill down into that and make sure those dollars are being used in a proper fashion. That's what happened, was the problem with EB-5 and with Gear Up, is that that money was not being used correctly. So we need a shake-up in leadership to change the status quo and to make sure that we put people in those positions. They're going to be watchdogs. I'm going to be a watchdog on corruption, and that is my promise to South Dakota.
Rebuttal, Ms. Noem.
Well, absolutely. Federal dollars that were given to the state, and the state conducts all oversight. All administrative and oversight duties are the duty of the state. And the legislature is the check and balance on the executive branch. Billy sat on the oversight committee. While he was investigating that, he was taking money into his campaign from people tied up in that mess and in that scandal. Yes, I advocate for federal dollars to come in and help our education programs, to help our tribes, but all the oversight and administration happens at the state level. And that's, I haven't been a part of these scandals. I've been working on behalf of South Dakota, making sure that I'm focusing on the issues that are priorities to them. He was in the middle of it and at the same time benefiting his own personal campaign while he was investigating.
And I'm assuming you're talking about the funds donated by the defense attorneys.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Thousands and thousands of dollars.
We're talking about attorneys. Well, she took money from people actually that were consultants in the Gear Up program. They were consultants making six-figure dollar amounts. And if we want to talk about money to campaigns, let's talk about that, because in your recent report, 44% of the money that you raised in this last report came from out-of-state special interests. That's pretty clear. 90% of the money in our campaign has come from right here in South Dakota.
No, well, I'm the only candidate in this race not taking corporate funds. which is something I'm very proud of. It was part of my campaign finance reform package. The things that he has accused me of, he's done the exact same thing of, and is perfectly legal, and the vast majority of our money has come from South Dakota. So this is where people need to get their facts, because it's again one of those situations where Billy's saying one thing, but he does something completely different. What he's referenced is activity that he has done by transferring funds, and also when he's talking about taking money and making sure that there aren't any pay-to-play issues or something going on in the state of South Dakota. That's why I said I wouldn't take corporate funds in this race. I'm the only candidate that won't take corporate funds, because I don't want people to think that it would result in us doing business when we get past this election. Billy is taking corporate funds, and it muddies the waters on his clarity.
Facts are stubborn things. All you have to do is look at the reports to see that 44% of Congresswoman Noem's money has come in from out-of-state political action committees and special interests.
All right, we're getting a little bit off topic. I want to go right back to talk a little bit about, be more specific about transparency in state government. What will you do to ensure that our citizens have transparency? Mr. Sutton.
Yeah, some of the things I've already done. I brought legislation to open up state government emails. That's very important. I think we need to have an open and transparent government as it relates to emails, memorandums, calendars, things of that nature. I also brought legislation to increase records retention. We need to keep records for a longer period of time so that we can audit and make sure that money is being used appropriately. In this day and age, there is no reason we shouldn't be able to keep fiscal records forever. Digitally. There should be no problems there. But yet the establishment has fought me on that. But that's something I'm going to fight for as governor of South Dakota. I think it's very important that we go down that road.
Ms. Noem, specifically?
Well, I'm not sure if Billy's released his emails. Did you release your emails that, I know you brought the legislation, but I'm not sure if you ever...
I did.
You did release all of your emails that were being asked for?
I released emails without even being asked to, because I wanted to prove that I do what I say.
Yeah. You know, I've already gone over my transparency agenda, things that I think are critically important. The taxpayers need to trust their state government again. And we do that by opening up and posting online agendas, meetings, streamlining that so they have access to see how those decisions are made, limiting executive session, having a reporter shield law, not having confidential settlement agreements anymore, making sure that we're building and bringing them into every single decision that's being made so that they understand that the state is trustworthy.
And just for the record, some viewers might want to know, have you released your emails?
I haven't been asked to release my emails. So at the federal level, we have we do a lot of casework for individuals. So people are having problems with the IRS, with the Social Security, with the VA. That's very personal information, and I can't release those emails. So I'm certainly open and transparent. But we also, everything the federal government does is FOIA. You know, you can get a Freedom of Information request and get almost anything that I do freely. So that's not as much of an issue at the federal level as it is at the state level.
But on the state level?
Oh, I think absolutely we could be as much transparent as possible. I think that, I mean, I have no problem, but I want to protect people's individual information and victims that might be suffering from some kind of a settlement agreement with the state or something like that. But if there's a way to be transparent on it, absolutely, I'm always willing to have that discussion.
And I know you gave us some details on your transparency. I just want to give you a chance to respond. So
that's a little contrary to what she said in interviews before about opening emails. Is she has not committed to open up emails. We need to have a presumption of openness of emails, and that's the legislation that I've brought in.
All right, we're going to move on. Next question. Construction is planned next year for the Keystone XL pipeline. It is not without controversy. Native American tribal leaders are opposed to the plan. You'll remember protests over the Dakota Access Pipeline led to a camp at the Standing Rock Indian Reservation where thousands of people stayed to fight against the construction of that pipeline. Viewer Cami wants to know where each of you stand on the pipeline and what your plan is to support landowners from possible protests. Mr. Sutton.
Yeah, I think that this is an important topic because I think it's going to set us apart in our leadership styles. As governor, I'm going to bring everybody to the table and make sure that we don't have happen what happened in North Dakota. It was a terrible thing what happened up there. And so I think we need to make sure that we're bringing everybody to the table. We're working with our tribes to make sure there isn't violence and that people are safe. That's going to be incredibly important because this could get very ugly and we do not want that to happen. I've built trust with our tribes, and I can bring them to the table and make sure that we keep everyone safe in this discussion.
Ms. Noem?
Yeah, I support the Keystone Pipeline, and I believe the infrastructure is needed, obviously, to meet our energy needs. And, you know, it's something where I differ from Billy. In the state legislature in votes, he hasn't supported the Keystone Pipeline or it being built across the state of South Dakota. And it gives us an opportunity in a lot of these counties to get some property taxes and some funding for our local school districts. But the protests are very concerning. In fact, I think one of the reasons that the Fraternal Order of Police did endorse me, because they recognize that I realize we need an aggressive plan for how we will handle protests peacefully, that will be engaging all parties and making sure that we're proactive about it. Many of these counties are concerned that it'll require more law enforcement from them than they can afford or provide, that we're going to be asking them as a state to shoulder a heavy burden to fund not only law enforcement necessary to keep everybody safe, but that it could possibly bankrupt their counties in the process, which then leaves them no revenue for roads and bridges, no revenue for school districts, and it's incredibly challenging. So if you go and talk to any of the leaders and the law enforcement in the counties where this pipeline is going through, they are very concerned, and they want a strong governor that is going to be proactive with a plan, coordinating law enforcement, county leaders, tribes, and folks, and bring everybody to the table and have that plan. That plan's underway, but it needs to be developed and prepared so that when construction begins, it can happen in a peaceful manner.
And we have a follow-up question for Mr. Sutton. For security purposes, where would the money for that come from?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to work within our current budget for that. We need to work with the tribes so that we find a partnership for that, so that we're making sure that we're not seeing damage to private property and that we're not seeing wasted dollars, but that we're working together to solve that problem. And so we're going to have to find money within our current budget to make that happen.
You know, with this pipeline, North Dakota has a whole book of lessons learned, you know, that will be helpful to South Dakota. They can live through this, and they understand what they handled correctly, what they wish they maybe would have done different. And I think that that will be helpful advice to have through this process as well. But we need a strong governor that recognizes that this construction project is going through the state and that we need safety for all individuals involved. What is concerning for me is that when you look at who's endorsed who in this race, that I have been endorsed by the Fraternal Order Police, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, Right to Life, NRA. Who has endorsed Billy is activist organizations, unions, and Planned Parenthood. And when you look at that, we're concerned about really his stances on some of these areas and who he's affiliated himself, if he will step up and be that strong governor and be willing to support a peaceful build.
All right, we're going to move on. Thank you.
We received a lot of questions about taxes. Let's drill down on this topic again. You've brought up this up several times during the debate. Let's clear the air. One of those questions is from Anne. She asks, are you in favor of implementing a state income tax? Ms. Noem.
No, I'm not in favor of implementing a state income tax. Throughout this race, I've talked about my 4 pillars. I'm not going to raise taxes. I'm not going to grow the size of state government. I'm going to go after transparency and fight government secrecy, and that I'm going to continue to fight the federal government to protect our state's rights. And this is a clear difference between the two candidates. Billy has openly said that he supports an income tax. He said that he supports the economic policies of Bernie Sanders, who has been out there campaigning for president, saying he wants a 55% income tax in the state. Bernie Sanders is a self-declared socialist, and for Billy to say he admires him and his ideas for the future are very concerning for me and do not line up with the values of South Dakota. So I do not support an income tax. I think the worst thing you could do right now in South Dakota with our farmers and ranchers going through what they're going through is to go take more money out of their pockets.
Mr. Sutton, earlier you said you do not support a state income tax.
That is correct.
Let's ask you about your support for Bernie Sanders.
No, I didn't support Bernie Sanders. The things that, if anything, that I liked was campaign finance reform and trying to keep the cost of higher education down. Those are 2 important things that are really important to South Dakotans. And so the Congresswoman trying to take words out of context is just not accurate. I do not support a state income tax, though, unequivocally. You're hearing it here.
Okay, thank you both. We're going to go on to our next question. Another hot topic from viewers is medical marijuana. Corey asks if you would support changing South Dakota's law to legalize it. And to give you some more background, take a look at this map of the issue. This is the status of marijuana legalization across the country. The darker green that you see there is medical only. Mr. Sutton.
You know, we've looked at this issue in the legislature, and until the FDA does something to address that, I think we're kind of somewhat at a standstill. The important part of all of this is that if you look at medical marijuana, that there isn't THC in that. So we're not talking about somebody getting high. That's the important factor here. And so the FDA having to decide what that looks like is going to be very important to how we move forward here in South Dakota.
And I know you can't speak for the legislature, but it's probably going to come up again, correct?
Yeah, I think it will. I mean, you know, as I've looked at this issue, we had families come in and testify that were using cannabidiol oil to help their kids that were having seizures, and it was the only thing that was helping them. And when you saw that testimony, it was incredibly moving. And so, you know, the cannabidiol oil is something that we're looking at and will continue to look at as a solution for some families. But that doesn't mean it works for everyone.
And we're going to give Ms. Noem a chance to respond to this and talk about it, but I just want to ask you, what would your bill need to include in order to get medical marijuana passed?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to
sign it.
I think we're going to have to. I mean, we already passed legislation in the legislature dealing with the cannabidiol oil, but then the FDA did not classify it as it should be, and so we're waiting for them to decide what that looks like.
Okay. Ms. Noem.
Well, I don't support legalizing marijuana. And when
We're talking about medical marijuana.
Medical
right
marijuana.
now.
I want it to go through the FDA process first. There's research that needs to be done. There's more information, and we need to make sure that it's the right strength and that people are getting what they actually are taking. So I don't support legalizing medical marijuana until it's been approved through the FDA. I will point out, though, that in Billy's time in the state legislature, he has supported legalizing marijuana and has supported legislation that would have made it legal for people to have marijuana in their system. So that's a very clear difference between both of us. And another example of when he's running for governor, he says one thing, but when he's in the legislature voting, he votes completely different.
I'll give you a chance
I did
to
not
respond to
support legislation legalizing marijuana. That is
Making it legal for people to have marijuana in their systems.
That's not the first thing that you said. You said that I support legalization of marijuana. That is not true. So I want to clear that up.
Okay, and what about marijuana in the system, is what she
Yeah, I mean,
said.
we're the only state in the nation that is a felony for ingestion. So that's a big difference in legalizing marijuana versus ingestion. It's that's a huge difference.
Okay, thank you both.
Next question. A few people are asking about key posts in your possible administrations. To summarize it all up, could you tell us what your cabinet will look like? Ms. Noem, you're up first.
Well, I would think that the cabinet officials would be people that are normal South Dakotans that have been running businesses, involved in local public school systems, that they've been contributing to their communities. You know, I've said throughout this campaign, I'm a big believer that the best ideas don't always come out of peer. That we need to bring new people to the table and have conversations about ways we can be innovative, that we can look at our education system and get better results for kids. Some of our schools have revenue issues, but also our kids, a third of them, have to take remedial courses when they graduate from high school before they're ready for a higher education degree. You know, we can do better for all those kids going forward, and we also can be innovative in how we approach workforce issues. So I think a lot of times when you're looking at cabinet officials, you want people that have leadership skills, but I also want them to be people that have been involved in that industry or area of expertise, and that they don't necessarily have to be from Peer Today. They would be people that would be willing to contribute and help us solve problems, think out of the box, and work as a team to make sure we're making the best decisions to move South Dakota forward.
So would you consider keeping any of the current cabinet members?
Yeah, I think I've already committed. I think Billy and I both at the tourism conference talked about Jim Hagan and what a great job he's doing in tourism, just because it's our #2 industry. It's been growing, and the tourism industry is very supportive of Jim and his role. And so, you know, you listen to folks and get feedback, and you do your work, and you see how beneficial they've been in the roles that they are. My background has been in business. Ag is our #1 industry. I've run farms and ranches. We ran a hunting lodge. That's in the tourism industry too. So it's important to have a governor that has experience in these areas as well. It helps you pick better people to fill those positions.
Before we let Mr. Sutton talk about this issue, are there any positions that you would like to create if you're elected governor?
I haven't thought of creating any new positions. There are some I would like to get to do more things. For instance, the tribal relations cabinet position. I want them to be an ambassador aggressively working with our tribes to really turn things around for our tribes. They need a different kind of relationship with our state government. They're economically challenged. They have huge mental and addiction counseling needs. Their schools are in tough shape and falling down. Their health care is disastrous. And I've worked on a lot of these reforms at the federal level. I've gotten grants and resources to justice centers, but I honestly believe that it's going to take a state government partnering with tribes to do more care coordination agreements, to get more involvement, to really have an impact for their communities and for their families. So that's one of the positions that will be very, very important in my administration, because I think that we need to see those communities have a totally different relationship with the state government going forward.
And Mr. Sutton, what would your cabinet look like?
I was just going to say before I jumped onto that, that's one area that I think Congresswoman Noem and I agree on is the tribal relations position. I give Governor Daugaard credit for making that a cabinet level position, which was a very good move and something that I'm going to look to be very aggressive with. And that's why I've worked, I've represented Indian country throughout my time as a senator, and I've built very good relations with them, and I'm going to work with them and get their input on what that position looks like and who that individual is going to be. You know what, I think we need a shake-up in state government. State government has gotten complacent at the top, and I think we need people that are going to shake that up a little bit. And so that is one of the reasons, as I explained earlier, that I chose Michelle LaValle. She's had a lot of experience in, whether that was Avera or Raven or at USD, in really bringing change to organizations and making sure that we find the best people for the job. You know, I have a ranch background as well, grew up on our family ranch. I also work as an investment executive where I help people save for retirement. I work with small businesses to help their employees save for retirement and really to strengthen Main Street. And that's really what my job entails. And so I'm also going to get input from people in business and to make sure that we're truly listening to the people on the ground, whether that's involved in healthcare or education, that we're finding people that are right for the job. And that's going to be my focus as governor.
All right, we got a lot of people tuning in tonight, and we just got this question from a viewer on Facebook during the debate. When politicians start talking bad about each other, they've lost my vote. Both candidates for governor have shown disrespect to each other, so who's to say they will not do the same to the people of South Dakota? How do you respond to Tim here? We'll begin with Mr. Sutton.
Yeah, you know, I'm often disappointed in it as well because I have been simply responding to the attacks that have been levied against me from the beginning of this campaign. And when I give information, I do it factually and I cite it, and we know where that information comes from. And the attacks on me have just not been true, and so that's been my focus.
When you look at the truth and making sure that the public has all the truth and information when they go and vote, I think that's incredibly important. There are very clear differences between myself and Billy Sutton. We think differently. I'm not a supporter of Bernie Sanders. I did not say that I like his policies. He's a self-described socialist. He said he voted for Hillary Clinton, but if Hillary Clinton was president today, that would be devastating for our way of life here in South Dakota. So listen, the way Billy has talked throughout this campaign.
That's sort of an example of what the viewer is talking about, isn't it?
But it is important that people have all the information when they go to make that decision. I mean, if Billy believed everything that he said in this campaign, he'd be a Republican. But he's not. He's a Democrat, and you have to look at that party's platform, what they stand for, what they fight for, to really know what he believes.
Thank you both.
So we need truth.
Thank you both.
All right, the next question from a viewer comes from Renee. She points out the governor's job is 365 days a year, and citizens pay taxes to maintain the governor's mansion, completed in 2005, every day of the year. Ms. Noem, you live in Castlewood, and Mr. Sutton, you live in Burke. Renee wants to know if you're elected as governor, if you will move with your family to Pierre on a full-time basis. Mr. Sutton, we don't have a lot of time, so let's keep these answers 30 seconds or less, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've just been focused on trying to win this race over the last year and a half, and I think we're going to try to tackle that when we get there. But, we'll definitely spend the vast majority of our time as a family in Pierre. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Luckily, technology allows us to do a lot of keeping in touch in different places. And the good news is I live only an hour and 45 minutes from Pierre. But I will be spending the vast majority of my time in Pierre because I think we have a lot of work to do and a lot of things to take on.
Ms. Noem, simple question. Would you move to Pierre with your family?
You know, I'll certainly be there doing my work, but my family, my husband has a business in Bryant, South Dakota. Booker's a junior in high school in Hamlin. So we'll go back and forth. I think it actually opens up a huge new opportunity for us to open up the Governor's Mansion to the public more often. If they can have more access and more activities there and they can enjoy it more, that's a win-win for everyone involved. So my family probably won't move because we'll be there and we'll certainly be committed and full-time on the job, and I'll go back and forth much like I have in Washington. But I think we have some huge opportunities to make the Governor's Mansion much more public, and the people of South Dakota will really enjoy that experience.
All right, thank you both. Interesting. We have time for the candidates to give final statements.
Our South Dakota gubernatorial debate continues in less than 2 minutes.